is Rich Padover, the summer interpretive tour guide here. And thank you for coming today for the Bring Your Own Lunch speaker series. Today we'll be looking at the Lawrence family, the founders, or among the founders of the principal founders, shall we say, of the city of Lawrence that bears their name. So I gave you a little synopsis there at the beginning, beginning with Samuel Lawrence, who was the sixth generation in the line of descent from John Lawrence from England, who came to the United States or America and settled in Watertown, okay, in 1635. And then in 1660, John Lawrence, who was a carpenter by trade, went with other artisans and farmers to settle in Groton, which at the time was a small hill town, okay, west of Lowell. And thus began the long-term settlement there in Groton by the Lawrence family, where they prospered, they were respected farmers, and became the leading men in the rural community in which they lived. Okay, so the Lawrence family, a very, important, influential family in history, especially in Massachusetts history and beyond. All right, so let's test your knowledge of the Lawrence family. All right, okay. Number one, Samuel Lawrence was born in 1754 on the family farm in Groton and served in which one of the following battles during the American Revolutionary War? All right, would anybody like to volunteer their answer and share it with us?
C, Battle of Bunker Hill.
Very good. C, Battle of Bunker Hill. Yes, Erlene, you're off to a roaring start. Very good, yes. Okay, yes. You might, this isn't necessarily the clue here, but you might imagine, okay, the Lawrences were living in Groton, right? Out of the three battles that I listed there, the only one really, the closest one, right, would be the Battle of Bunker Hill right here in Massachusetts, right? Although, as Tom Spitaleri pointed out, technically it was Breed's Hill, right? Okay, but in history books, right, we know it as Bunker Hill, the Battle of Bunker Hill. Okay, so yes. Now he didn't. Samuel did not play like a big role in the Battle of Bunker Hill. He didn't actually see much combat there. He was more of like one of the background, not to diminish what he did, but more of like a background helper, okay, helping to ensure that, the men who were actually firing the guns, were successful, okay, so. All right, number two, Samuel's first son, Luther, was born in 1778 and became a lawyer and a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. In 1831, he moved from Groton to Lowell and became a mayor and a bank president. Now, on April 17, 1839, while walking on an inspection tour through a mill in Lowell that his brothers William and Samuel had purchased, Luther accidentally and suddenly fell 17 feet from a platform that he was walking on into a wheel pit, hit his head, and died almost immediately. What was the name of this mill where Luther met a tragic end? Anybody want to volunteer their answer? It begins with M, right? I made that pretty obvious.
What? It's not the Monomac, because that's in Lawrence.
The Monomac would be in Lawrence, right? Middlesex, right, the Middlesex Mills, right, okay. In Lowell, and again, here's kind of a clue again, right, that I inserted. As you may know, Middlesex Community College is in Lowell, right? The main campus is Bedford, but they have a satellite campus in Lawrence, right? It's like where I teach at Northern Essex. Our main campus is Haverhill, but we have a satellite campus here in Lawrence, right? Okay, so Middlesex that was the clue there, right? Okay, so. All right, so I hope we're all 2 for 2 so far, but if not, that's okay. All right. Number 3. Samuel's fourth son, Amos, was born in 1786 in Groton. He arrived in Boston at 21 years old with only $20 in his pocket. Back then you could get away with this, right? Opened a dry goods store, and from this small beginning grew one of the most substantial fortunes in the United States. He also served on the building committee for the construction of which one of the following, which was completed on June 17, 1843. Anybody want to volunteer their answer?
B, Daniel Hall.
No, sorry. No. A for effort, though, Erlene. Yes. Yeah, the Bunker Hill Monument, right, okay. See, the thing is, all the other 3 were already constructed by then, okay? So out of the 4 there, the Bunker Hill Monument came last, okay? So, so he served, when things like this go up, right, when they're constructed, buildings like this, other kinds of structures, there's usually a building committee that's appointed, like by, let's say, the local governing authority, right? People who want to serve on the committee, right, to help raise money for it, get publicity for it, things like that. So Amos Lawrence apparently felt very strongly about this and got himself, on the committee, and then helped serve on it to plan for it.
It obviously helped that he had a family member at the battle.
True, right, and it helped, right, that his father had served there at Bunker Hill as well, in the battle, right.
And that usually helps to bring revenue in.
Yes, and by extension, it helps with the revenue stream, right? So raising revenue, yep. So, all right, by the way, any questions or comments so far? Okay, number 4. Samuel's 5th son, Abbott, was born in 1792 in Groton. He established the firm A&A Lawrence with his brother Amos in the sale of domestic cotton and wool goods, and they also became agents for domestic manufacturers, helping them, in there with locating factories, getting them going, okay, with the selling of their finished product. In 1845, Abbott took the lead in the development of what was to become the textile manufacturing city bearing his name, becoming the largest stockholder and the president of the Essex Company, the founding group of investors of the city of Lawrence. Now, Abbott also had an interest in politics, and in 1834 was elected to which one of the following? Anybody want to volunteer their answer?
I said
A? Very good. The House of Representatives, yes. Yes, right, okay. So, A, he became a congressman, a U.S. representative, okay. Now, after when we're done here, this is from my collection at home that I brought in today. Now, back in the 1800s, okay, voting, I'll just briefly go off track here, but it's related to what we're talking about, okay. Back in the 1800s, when people would vote, it was a lot different than today. Today, you walk into your local polling station, you check in, the clerk hands you a ballot, right? Okay. Back in the 1800s, okay, the way they did it, and then it changed in 1888, but up until then, the way they did it is the political parties would hand out ballots before the election, okay? So if you were a Democrat, you'd visit your local Democratic Party headquarters. If you were a Whig, you'd visit your local Whig Party headquarters. May I have a ballot for the upcoming election, okay? So they were pre-printed. The party that you were voting for, you would go see them, request a ballot, then you would bring it with you on election day, okay? They would not hand them out to you at the polling station, okay? The other way that you would get a ballot to vote back then is that newspapers, partisan newspapers, would print pages of ballots, okay? So if there was a Democratic, with a capital D, newspaper, okay, they would print ballots for the Democratic Party, okay? if there was a Whig newspaper, okay, they would print Whig ballots, okay? So you purchase a copy of the newspaper that was supporting the party that you planned on voting for, okay? Cut out one of the ballots from the pages, okay, and then bring it with you on election day, right, to hand to the clerk at your polling station, okay? So that's the way we did it up until the late 1800s in this country, okay? So I have in my collection a Whig ballot, okay, from 1834, and for Governor John Davis, and again, you can come up and look at it when we're done here, but for Governor John Davis, for Lieutenant Governor Samuel Armstrong, okay, and then for Representative to Congress, our friend here, Abbott Lawrence, okay, when he first ran for Congress for the U.S. House in 1834, and there's his name on the ballot, right, with the office that he was seeking, okay? And then you have the down ballot names listed here as well. So for state senator, okay, and then for state rep, okay? So again, you know, if in 1834, if you were a Whig, which was the opposition party to the Democrats that time, okay, under Andrew Jackson, those who did not like President Jackson, thought he was wielding too much power, called him King Andrew I, you know, he was abusing the U.S. Constitution, taking certain liberties, okay. So that's how the Whig Party formed in opposition to President Andrew Jackson and his policies, okay? Now, the Whig Party, as you may know, eventually became what we know today as the Republican Party, okay? In 1854, they merged with the Free Soil Party and the anti-slavery Democrats to form today's Republican Party. The one thing they had in common, of course, I'll ask you, was what? What's the one thing that united all three of those parties that brought them together in 1854 to form one party, the Republican Party? Anybody know? They felt very strongly about a certain issue in our country. Tom, you look like you want to say it?
Anti-slavery.
Anti-slavery, right. They were all very much anti-slavery, right? Well, I kind of gave it away when I said the anti-slavery Democrats, right? And then the Free Soilers, right? Now, by the way, the Free Soil Party, it doesn't necessarily mean that they wanted free land for everybody, but free soil in the sense that man should be able to do what he wants and being free to do what he wants, okay? Not to be a slave to anybody, all right? So give a man soil and let him use it, utilize it freely.
They're kind of like the libertarians.
Yeah, kind of like libertarians, what we might think of as libertarians today, right? Okay. And then the Whig Party, again, you know, one of their basic or major tenets or beliefs was very much against slavery, okay? So.
And some say the father who created the, quote, the Republican Party was John Greenleaf Whittier.
Yes, right. And thank you, Tom. John Greenleaf Whittier, the famous poet. You can tour his house in Haverhill, right? It's open to the public during the warm weather season. The other thing, what a lot of people don't know about John Greenleaf Whittier, because they associate him with poetry, is that, like Tom pointed out, he was a great anti-slavery, an abolitionist of his day, one of the greatest.
His brother.
And his brother as well.
We'll never hear about it. Maybe next show we'll talk about it.
Yeah, there we go.
You might never hear the brother because he had 110 different pen names.
Oh yeah, when you're a poet, I guess, right? When you're a writer, yeah.
So you never hear how famous his brother was.
No, right. I mean, I know nothing about his brother, but Tom, see, that's a topic for your bring your own lunch presentation next summer. Okay, very good. Okay, so number 5. As an elected official, okay, I think I gave this away, right? Abbott Lawrence, you all get a freebie here. Abbott Lawrence was a member of which political party? Again, the Whig Party, right? Okay, so the Know Nothing Party, by the way, as you may know, was kind of short-lived in the 1840s and 50s. They were anti-Catholic and anti-immigrant, okay? So all the Irish and the Catholic, the German Catholics that were coming into our country, like in the 1850s, okay, and the Know Nothing Party formed an opposition to Catholics and to immigrants, okay? They thought they were ruining the country, that they were taking jobs away from the native population here, okay? They were just creating a lot of mayhem here and breeding crime and all that. So, but again, the Know Nothing Party, they didn't last long. They were around in the 1840s and 50s. And so, yeah, all right. Okay, and by the way, the reason they're called the Know Nothing Party, okay, is because they had to take like an oath of secrecy, okay? So when somebody approached them, okay, and said, oh, so who are you supporting? You know, what are your political beliefs? I know nothing, okay, because of the oath they had to take, all right? So hence, that's why they're called the Know Nothing Party, all right? So, all right, so any questions or comments?
Did they ever have like a notable candidate?
Yes. In 1852, former President Millard Fillmore, okay, who was a Whig, ran on the Know Nothing ticket, okay, as a third-party candidate. Yeah. So, but obviously they never won the White House, okay? But a former president did run as a third party, Know Nothing. Yeah, okay, so. All right, number 6. Now, in the 1848 presidential campaign, if certain political circumstances had turned out differently, Abbott Lawrence would have eventually become president of the United States, right, which would have been really an additional, shining star here for Lawrence, right, okay, on July 9th, 1850. If possible, if any of you would like to or are able to briefly describe those circumstances now. So does anybody know the story of how, if not, I'll explain, but anybody know the story of how Abbott Lawrence could have become, if things worked out a little differently in 1848, could have become President of the United States? No? Okay, all right, so briefly, at the 1848 Whig National Convention, okay, they nominated Zachary Taylor for president. Old Fuss and Feathers was his nickname, okay? He was a veteran of the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. So he rode into the Whig convention on his military credentials, or coattails, okay? So war hero, the Battle of Buena Vista and other battles that took place in the Mexican-American War, okay? So the Whigs decided, okay, let's go with a military hero now, we'll run him for president, okay? Now, back then, it was the delegates at the National Nominating Convention who chose the vice presidential running mate, okay? FDR changed all that in the 1930s. He's like, what do you mean the delegates are choosing my running mate? I should be the presidential nominee, right? Should be the one who's choosing his running mate, right? You want somebody compatible with you, who, right, in modern times, that's how the vice presidential running mate is chosen. Chemistry, that's the most important thing, right? You want to have chemistry between the two people on the ticket, right? Running for president and vice president, okay? Somebody compatible with you, somebody who thinks like you, right? And then, of course, there are other considerations nowadays that go into it: geography, religion, gender, right, ideology, okay? So you might have like a liberal, but then you'll put a moderate on the ticket, let's say, to balance things out, right? Okay, so anyway, so before FDR, it was the convention delegates who selected the vice presidential running mate. So in 1848, the delegates at the Whig National Convention chose Millard Fillmore, okay? Now, Abbott Lawrence was also in contention, though, to be the vice presidential running mate, okay? When the delegates voted, Abbott Lawrence missed out by 1 vote to Millard Fillmore. Okay? He was like the second choice and only 1 vote behind in the balloting. Okay? So the Whigs now, the delegates, choose Millard Fillmore to run with Zachary Taylor. Okay? Now, as you may know, Zachary Taylor died in office July 9th, 1850. Okay? He had various ailments. He was never healthy. All right? So, Millard Fillmore now, right, goes from vice president to president, okay? But if the delegates had selected Abbott Lawrence to run with Zachary Taylor, right, and we would have had Vice President Abbott Lawrence, when Taylor died in office, Abbott Lawrence would have gone from vice president to president. How's that? Okay, so that's the story, okay, of how Abbott Lawrence almost, if circumstances were a little different, right, would have become president of the United States. All right, so, okay, any questions or comments? Okay. Number 7. During the presidential administration of Zachary Taylor, Abbott Lawrence was offered and accepted a non-elected position in government. What was it? All right, anybody want to volunteer their answer?
Said B.
B?
Yeah.
No, sorry.
D?
No, sorry, Paul. No, all right. So we've eliminated 2, and we got 2 possibilities left now. Tom?
C.
C, right. Minister to England. Okay, what we would call ambassador today. Ambassador to England. Okay, back then, in the diplomatic corps, they were called ministers. Okay, and again, what we would call ambassador today. Okay, now I'll tell you, for a long time in our nation's history, if you were asked by the president to be an ambassador, subject to U.S. Senate confirmation, okay, the most prestigious ambassadorial or ministerial position you could receive would be minister to England, okay? In the diplomatic corps, that was considered like a plum, the best assignment that you can get, okay? Today now, I don't really think so, okay? It's more evened out today now, But again, in the earlier days of our country, the most prestigious appointment you can get if you were to be a minister to a country would be minister to England. Sometimes it's also called the Court of St. James, right? Okay. Ambassador to the Court of St. James. Basically, you're ambassador to England, okay? So even though Abbott Lawrence did not become president or vice president, right? Well, he was a congressman and got to hold a prestigious position in the diplomatic corps, minister to England.
Who offers that position? The president?
The president, Taylor, yeah. Okay, so kind of maybe like a consolation prize, right, where he wasn't selected at the convention to be vice president, okay? So, but even today, right, if you want to become an ambassador to a country, it's the president who appoints you. Normally, I'll tell you this, normally to get appointed ambassador in the modern age to a country, generally it's like a reward by the president for supporting him when he ran for office, okay, in any way, like donating money, rallying voters for him, okay? So in the modern age now, generally, if you're named an ambassador to a country, it's not that you necessarily have experience in foreign affairs. It's more so actually that you supported the winning candidate in the election, and as a thank you, the president appoints you ambassador to a certain country, okay? But again, subject to U.S. Senate confirmation, okay? The same way with cabinet positions, right? You have to be approved by the U.S. Senate. okay?
You've got a good friend that was a cabinet position, no?
I don't know, Tom, who's that? Who's that?
You bring him to Northern Essex every year.
Oh, well, I've had some ambassadors speak at Northern Essex. Rufus Gifford, for example.
No, who was the Obama administration?
Scott Brown, he spoke one time. He was ambassador to Australia and New Zealand. Rufus Gifford was ambassador to Denmark.
That's it.
Yeah, Rufus Gifford. Yeah. So yeah, when I bring in speakers to Northern Essex sometimes, I've had some ambassadors, right? Yeah. So yeah. Okay, number 8, Amos Lawrence, nephew of Abbott Lawrence. So he was actually Amos Lawrence Jr., named after his father. Was born in 1814, developed a very strong anti-slavery sentiment, okay? Became involved in the New England Emigrant Aid Company. What did they do? They transported anti-slavery immigrants into the Kansas Territory to influence and shift the balance of political power there so that Kansas would become a free state rather than a slave state, right? If you remember your U.S. history, bleeding Kansas, right? All the violence that broke out because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 that created popular sovereignty, right? Let the people decide. Rather than Congress, for example, let the people who are living in the territory, let them vote, right? If they want slavery or not, right? But all that did was create more trouble there, right? Hence the term bleeding Kansas, because of all the violence going on in Kansas at the time between pro-slavery and anti-slavery people, right? So the New England Emigrant Aid Company actually was transporting anti-slavery immigrants into the Kansas Territory so that hopefully that would tilt it in favor of it becoming anti-slavery there, right? Okay. So during this whole process, Amos came into contact with another anti-slavery activist who was well known for conducting a raid at the U.S. Arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, with the intention of using the guns from the raid, okay, giving them to slaves to arm them so they could rise up and revolt and try to get their freedom, okay? Now, the raid was put down by the military, and Amos, excuse me, gave money for the defense of the leader of the raid when he was put on trial. Now, who was the leader of the raid at Harper's Ferry? John Brown, yes, right? If we remember our U.S. history, John Brown, right? Okay. Now, the other 3 people there were also abolitionists, right? Only they never did anything on the scale that John Brown did, right? He really went out on the limb there and paid for it with his life, okay? So just a little additional information here. In case you're wondering, the raid happened on October 16th, 1859. Okay, October 16th, 1859. And he got this bright idea, okay, that, if I get like-minded people together and we raid the federal arsenal, right, we'll steal the guns, we'll redistribute them to the slaves, right? That'll encourage the slaves to rise up and revolt and possibly gain their freedom, okay? Well, first of all, John Brown was what we would say today a little off his rocker, okay? And he wasn't all there, okay? And you know how many men he was able to gather up to assist him in this grand plan of his? 21. Okay, not really conducive for raiding a federal arsenal and being successful, right? So all he could gather up was 21 men. That was it, okay? Not looking good right off the bat there, right? Okay, so the raid was put down, okay, by local people who wanted to stop the raid, right? And by the militia, the local militia, and the military, the Marines, actually, okay? And does anybody know who was in charge of that military, the U.S. military regiment that helped put down the raid at Harper's Ferry. I'll give you a hint, he became much more famous later not long after, in the Civil War.
Was that Grant?
Nope. What would be the opposite of Grant? Lee. Robert E. Lee.
Oh, sure.
Yes, right, okay. Grant was the Union general, Robert E. Lee was the Confederate general. So the U.S. military regiment, the Marines that helped put down the raid at Harper's Ferry, was led by none other than Robert E. Lee, right, who would gain much more fame several years later as the Confederate general in the Civil War.
So he was part of the Democrat Party then? You wanted to put that right there.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. It's a good guess. He might have been, yes, yeah. I honestly don't know what his political affiliation was, but possibly. Okay, so so again, this happened in October, all right? Now, back then, the judicial system moved a lot faster than it does today, because less than 2 months later, on December 2nd, 1859, John Brown was hung for treason, okay, for leading the raid on Harper's Ferry, okay? So the raid was October 16th, then there was the trial, December 2nd, again, all in 1859, he was hung for treason, okay? So.
We visited his grave.
You visited his grave?
Yeah.
Ah. Is it in Virginia or West Virginia? New York.
It's where they had the Olympics one year.
Oh, was that Lake Placid?
That's it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Anything noteworthy that you remember about the grave site that you want to tell
I
us?
think it was just below, they had an area with a metal fence around it, an old metal fence. And it was right below, I think, the ski jump, or some venue.
Oh, yeah, yeah, okay. Interesting, yeah, okay.
That was a long time ago, I don't know what it looks like today.
Yeah, because I think the Winter Olympics in Lake Placid were like 1984. 1980, okay,
That was the
1980.
year that we asked the Russians to get the puck out of Afghanistan. If you remember the big flyers all around the Olympics.
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, okay. All right, good, all right. Thank you, everybody. Number 9. Many of the Lawrence family members are buried in which one of the following cemeteries? Anybody want? B, right, Mount Auburn in Cambridge.
They don't want to do.
Okay. That's all right.
That's why.
You visited there, yeah. Yeah, it is, as you may know, it is a historic cemetery. A lot of notable people are buried there, right? Okay, yeah. And I think I saw an article in the Boston Globe recently that they do want to, like, enhance it there and try to, bring in even more tourists there to view the cemetery,
Yeah, they have a lot of good things. They have scary movie nights in that cemetery.
Oh.
and everything,
Oh, really, yeah?
Just to attract people in there.
Yeah. So, yeah. But yeah, so most of the Lawrence family, they're buried either at Mount Auburn there in Cambridge or in Groton Cemetery in Groton, the town cemetery there, okay? But I would say more than 50% probably at Mount Auburn, okay? So, okay. And number 10. The city of Lawrence, of course, is named after Abbott Lawrence and his family, who invested heavily in the development of the city that was to bear their name. But exactly how was Lawrence named? What was the mechanism, okay? So anybody want to volunteer their answer?
None of the above?
No. Sorry, Tom. It is one of the above, yeah.
Legislative degree.
No, sorry. No. Okay, so we got it down to like 2 now, right? Okay, you got a 50-50 shot here now. Anybody?
Referendum?
No, sorry. Town meeting. Yes, town meeting.
Excuse me, Rich, when did that stop? Because
Okay.
most of the towns in New Hampshire and early towns in Massachusetts were all named up by Governor Benny Wentworth.
Mm-hmm.
So when did this stop?
Okay, now, as we all may know, Lawrence was a town before it was a city, right? Okay, 1847, a town, 1853, a city, okay? So for those first 6 years or so, Lawrence was a town, okay? So it was having town meetings, okay? And this was before the mayor, before they began electing a mayor, okay? So on January 13th, 1847, okay, Lawrence had its first town meeting, okay? And it was called by the Essex Company, right, okay? The founders of Lawrence, right, those textile tycoons, what we call them, right, okay? So at the beginning, their headquarters used to be on Island Street, okay? And that was the site of their original headquarters. Then later, towards the end of the 1800s, they moved into 6 Essex Street, which of course is now the site of the Lawrence History Center, okay? And they were there until like 1990 or so, okay? But originally, the Essex Company had their headquarters on Island Street, all right? So they called a meeting at their headquarters, okay, for the specific purpose of for naming now this new city, right? Because it was pretty much nameless, even though it had been under construction for the previous 2 years, beginning in 1845, okay? So as you may know, and I think I've given a talk about this before, but as you may know, Lawrence had different names, right, temporary, before town meeting, okay, and by a vote of the townspeople at the time, decided to name it Lawrence in honor of Abbott Lawrence and his family, okay? So it was known as New City, for lack of a better name, right? Okay, New City. It was also known as Merrimack for a while, right? For example, when they first opened up the post office here in Lawrence, the first post office, which was on the Turnpike, which is today, we call it South Broadway, okay? The first post office in Lawrence on the Turnpike on today's South Broadway, it had the name Merrimack, okay? It wasn't the Lawrence Post Office, it was the Merrimack Post Office, okay? So New City, Merrimack, Essex, Lawrence, and again, this went back and forth during the first few years or so. Lawrence was also known as Essex, okay? And another name that people were calling what was to become Lawrence, Abbott Bridge, okay? Because as you may know, the first bridge in what was to become the city of Lawrence was called Abbott Bridge, an old wooden bridge that burned, okay? So for a while, let's call it Abbott Bridge, all right? So we needed an official name here, right? Because different people are calling it these different names, but you need a permanent name that, you know, that people will agree on, okay? So January 13th, 1847, town meeting held at the headquarters of the Essex Company on Island Street. By a popular vote, okay, of those in attendance, they said basically, well, considering what Abbott Lawrence has done here and his family, let's name it Lawrence, okay? And I'll tell you, Abbott Lawrence, out of his own pocket, contributed about $1 million of his own money. Imagine what that would be today, right? So he invested about $1 million of his own money into developing what became the city of Lawrence, okay? And people knew that too, right? I mean, it was no secret. So yeah, let's name it after Abbott Lawrence and his family, okay? So Tom, so town meeting initially here, that's how they vote.
So, because prior to that,
Yeah,
if you look up the older towns like Manchester, even Methuen, that was
Yeah.
after Lloyd Paul Methuen.
yeah.
That was all Governor Benny Wentworth's doing.
Yeah,
for
okay,
the most part.
yeah, okay.
So no, I was just, so Lawrence must have been one of the first that did it by town
Probably then, yeah,
then, early on.
early on, right, right.
Because I know up until at least the 1790s, the governors were still naming towns.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. All right. So, and then if any of you are interested in following up on this and reading more about the Lawrence family, I recommend the Lawrences of Groton, Massachusetts, right? Because they never lived in Lawrence, did they? Right? Okay. Lawrence, Groton, Cambridge, Boston, elsewhere, but never in the city of Lawrence itself. I don't know why, but they just chose not to, okay? I think they just loved the homestead there in Groton so much, they couldn't leave, you know? So, some of you may remember Phil Laudani. He was still around when I first started working here in '05 and then a little after that. He was a local author. He worked in the social services field, mental health, okay? He had a degree from Northern Essex. But he also enjoyed writing and studying the history of Lawrence. And he wrote some publications that we have for sale in the gift shop downstairs, okay? So one book that he wrote is called The Lawrences of Groton, Mass. It's only $5 in the gift shop downstairs if any of you are interested. It's like a booklet, okay? It's an easy read. So, all right, now, before I take any questions, comments, I just want to, and again, you can come up and look at these if you'd like. I have Amos Lawrence's autograph here, okay? Now, this is Amos Lawrence Jr., okay, nephew of Abbott Lawrence. I came across this at an auction several years ago out of New York, okay? So I'm looking through the catalog, you know, all historical stuff, political stuff, you know, what I collect. And I saw this, I'm like, oh my God, I don't believe it. So it's what we call a clipped signature, all right? So it's from a letter that he wrote, all right? And the part that has his sign off here was clipped from that, okay? So yours respectfully, Amos A. Lawrence, although he didn't put Junior, Boston, March 16th, 1870. All right. See, his father, Amos Lawrence Sr., was gone by then. All right. So I know it has to be Junior because of the year. All right. So I purchased it. It wasn't a lot of money. Well, I think I was probably the only one who, in the auction, who wanted this item because nobody else. I was probably the only bidder, like from Massachusetts or let's say from the Lawrence area here, who knew Amos, about Amos Lawrence, all right? So I think I was the only bidder. I got it really cheap, but happy to have it in my local history collection at home, So, and then if anybody wants to come up and take a look, this is I won't call it a gravestone, I'll call it a monument to the Abbott family at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. If you look, you can see Abbott Lawrence's name inscribed there, and there's some other names of the Lawrence family underneath it, okay? And then the Middlesex Mills, where Luther Lawrence met his tragic end, falling accidentally from that platform, 17 feet, falling 17 feet and dying almost instantly. So his brothers, who ran the Middlesex Mills in Lowell, this is the regulations that the workers had to abide by. You can take a look at it if you'd like, but obviously I think we all know how mill life was back then, right? Very regulated, very regimented, hard work, for very little pay, dangerous work, right? But I came across this, and it's signed, if you will, Samuel Lawrence, agent, the agent for the mills, like a promoter of the mills, right? So Samuel Lawrence, his sons, who were involved in the Middlesex Mills in Lowell, okay? But yeah, does anybody have any questions or comments for me? No?
I looked up Robert E. Lee, he was actually a member of the Whigs.
The Whigs, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
once insurrection started, he,
yeah,
the Confederates.
Okay.
Politics kind of, he was an afterthought.
yeah, okay, thank you, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, all right, okay. All right, so we're all set. We learned all about the Lawrence family today, perhaps added to what you may have known already. And so now I hopefully made, if I haven't already in the past, I made Lawrence historians out of all of you today now, right? Okay. All right. So, all right. Well, thank you all as always for coming. I appreciate your attendance and participation. And again, the flyers are in the back and downstairs as well. And hope to see you at the other presentations, the other programs. If you're interested in any of my actual tours, boat tours, walking tours. Just let me know. Walking tours, you just show up. The boat tours, you do have to make a reservation.